So Etna really is a small appellation. It's 1,000 hectares, so it's about 2,500 acres. Still, we're super small. Etna is only 5% of the whole Sicilian vineyard surface. And the wines we make here are mountain wines.
From Eat, Drink, Fun, this is the Eat, Drink, Fun podcast. I'm Chris Miller. Ciao to my hungry and thirsty friends, and welcome back to another episode of the Eat, Drink, Fun podcast. Today, we travel to Sicily, where we explore the unique wines of Mt.Etna. I spent an afternoon at the Benanti family vineyards near Catania. My visit began in the traditional production facility called a Palmento, and then we went up to one of the named vineyards, Contrada MonteSerra, where we learned about the unique viticultural practices, and ended up in the tasting room with Salvino Benanti. Now, if I asked you to name your favorite Sicilian wine, could you? Until recently, I certainly couldn't. But then I visited Sicily, and my eyes were opened. Like a lot of wine drinkers and many wine students, I was aware of Marsala, which is a traditionally sweet fortified wine named after its city of origin on Sicily's west coast. And I'm familiar with Nero, which is an indigenous grape variety that happens to be Sicily's #1 export today. Nero is popular because it's got this big, round, dark fruit flavor with sweet tannins and a really full body. And in that way, it does reflect the hot, arid climate where it's grown. And for most consumers, this is what we've come to expect from Sicilian wine. But then there's Mt.Etna. It's Europe's largest active volcano, and it's located on the northeastern side of the island. And when I say active, it's very active. It erupts pretty regularly and pretty dramatically. But those eruptions create a lot of diverse soils, and the mountain itself creates interesting microclimates, specifically on the northern, eastern, and southern slopes. And the elevation, of course, it renders wines with a higher acidity and more precision and finesse. So Mt.Etna also gets snow, which is indirectly one of the main reasons I went to Sicily. Not to ski, but for the gelato, and more specifically, for the granita. It was actually an episode of Chef's Table a few years ago that was seared into my mind. If you're familiar with that episode, it focused on Chef Corrado Assenza of Caffè Sicilia in Noto. My big takeaway? Sicilians actually eat ice cream, or granita, for breakfast. The traditional flavors are lemon and almond, but you can get plenty of others too. It's accompanied by a brioche and a cup of coffee. This is my idea of a perfect breakfast, and I had to go. And as it turns out, I'm an almond granita guy. But that granita tradition is also linked to Mt.Etna. Arabs brought the concept of sweetened, icy dessert to Sicily, and the locals around Catania harvested and stored ice from Mt.Etna to make that granita. That alone tells us about the unique climate of Mt.Etna and the different kind of viticulture that's practiced there. The Benanti family has been making wines near Mt.Etna for several generations, but it didn't get truly serious about creating commercially viable wines until pretty recently. As is the case with many areas, European wine laws in the 70s and 80s encouraged regions like Sicily to overproduce and create a lot of bulk wine. Some of it was sold to other European winemakers to fortify their weaker wines, but much of it was also just distilled into commercial alcohol. So the late 20th century looks pretty bleak for Sicilian wine, until people like Giuseppe Benanti decided to change the story. Today, his twin sons, Salvino and Antonio, lead the business, which focuses on local grape varieties like NerelloMascalese, Nerello Cappuccio, which are both red, and Caricante, which is white. Over the past several years, Benanti wines have been widely recognized for their exceptional quality. Distribution is global. Benanti wines are available across the United States, but if you live in the Northeast, specifically New York, New Jersey, or Connecticut, you can thank renowned importer Wilson Daniels for bringing them to you. And with that, I hope you enjoy the show.
This is the The room is called Palmento. Palmento is a word that is similar to pavimento. In Italian means floor. Because up there, the top level, there is a lava stone floor where people used to throw the grape directly from the vineyard through the windows on that first level.
Right.
They stomped on it, physically, and only with gravity. You can see there are pipes coming out from each side.
Right.
The juice came from the first level to the first tanks.
As you can hear, our visit to Benanti began in the old traditional production facility. Now, palmentos are no longer allowed to be used under DOC laws, and modern winemaking equipment is far more hygienic and produces a much higher quality wine. Nevertheless, it was really interesting to see the traditional way that wine was made on the island. This enormous room is dominated by a 300-year-old chestnut beam in the center, which was used to crush the grapes. Now, Bianca went on to explain the motivation for Giuseppe Benanti to make high-quality wines on the island.
In the 80s, Giuseppe Benanti, that is Salvino's father, he was a pharmacist, so he had this pharmaceutical company. He had this thing, this insight. He was at the dinner with some friends, and he was asking for a Etna wine to pair with a beautiful food, and they were like, sorry sir, we don't have such a wine to pair with this food. Because in the past, 30 years ago, we only had Etna wines, but not Etna certified wines. So no rules, and mostly on Mt.Etna we had every kind of international variety planted. So Merlot, Pinot Noir, Chardonnay, whatever you name it, it was planted on Mt.Etna. No rules at all. The native varieties are called NerelloMascalese, Nerello Cappuccio, Carricante, we have Catarratto, so Cappuccio and Mascalese are reds. And then Carricante is white. Catarratto, Minnella, also some other local varieties of whites. But the three main ones are NerelloMascalese, Nerello Cappuccio, and Carricante, these three. So in 30 years ago, I was mentioning Giuseppe Benanti decided to start in a way to make refined wines on Mt.Etna. And with other 4 or 5 winemakers that were already here, like Barone di Villagrande, Murgo, they already had history with winemaking. They just decided to start making some rules and replacing all the international varieties with the local ones. So they started this job. They were clever enough to call consultants because no one was really doing that for a living. So he's a pharmacist, so he knew about exams and tricks in the laboratory, but not about wine.
Right.
So they called these consultants from the northern Italy or from France as well. They came here, they mapped whatever was on this beautiful, with this map it's very easy to understand. So 30 years ago, we only had 5 winemakers, proper ones, Now there are 150 to make DOC wines, and it's like a backwards sea on this side of the volcano.
If you look at Mt.Etna on a map, the best vineyard locations are on the northern, eastern, southern, and southwestern facing slopes of the volcano.
We are the only winery that has 4 vineyards in the 4 different slopes. But knowing that after the studying, we figure out there are 72 different kind of soils on Mt.Etna. Wow. And every single lava flow, layers and layers of lava flow, but different minerals.
Etna is unique in that it gets more rain than anywhere else in Sicily. In the north, it can rain any time of year, whereas in the east and the south, it's more seasonal, usually in autumn or winter. But as Bianca explains, the eastern exposure is unique and special for growing white varieties.
Here we have rain because of there is a valley here, it's called Bove Valley, that with the winds from the sea and the sea breeze in general create a vortex of clouds and rain. So here it rains 3 times more than there.
Oh, that's incredible.
And it's perfect for the white. So if you want to certify an Etna Bianco Superiore, so the superior Etna white, you're only allowed by the book of rules that we have to make it here from Milo.
Okay.
If you do not have a vineyard here, you cannot make an Etna Bianco Superiore. Our PietraMarina, for example, comes from here.
Okay.
That is our top white.
From here, Bianca handed us off to one of her colleagues, Sophie. And Sophie led us up the hill into one of Benanti's named vineyards. This one was called Contrada MonteSerra. Now, what's special about these volcanic soils is that they are so exceptionally well drained. Basically, the phylloxera louse that feeds on the rootstocks of Vitis vinifera vines, it can't exist. Think similarly of the volcanic soils in Santorini, Greece. In both places, because of the great drainage, you can actually have ungrafted vines that are over 100 years old.
Volcanic soil, if you look at the soil here, so the MonteSerra, probably Bianca mentioned you, is a former crater, is an extinct crater from Etna. You can guess it by the shape, since it's an hill but with a flat top. And on the MonteSerra, we have this vineyard. Right now it's about 8 hectares. Mostly NerelloMascalese, so all this one is all NerelloMascalese for the reds. Mm-hmm. And the soil here on the MonteSerra estate, as you can see, is of course dark, extremely sandy, volcanic soil that
It's almost red, yes.
rich of all these red, oranges, pumices. Huh. So all these light, extremely, of course, light stones.
Wow.
Make this soil extremely drainy.
Right.
So we can, we do not have any artificial irrigation here. We don't need it.
I found that interesting, and I asked how the climate and the amount of rainfall might impact the vintages from year to year.
But in the last few years, what I noticed is that vintage variation is quite big. And then the wine, as an example, the 2017 has been one of the warmest vintage ever.
Really?
Warm and dry, but a lot. And so 2017 wines, both white, reds, are probably a little bit more powerful in terms of alcohol, a little bit, not a lot, since we try to check it out, the alcohol content.
She's singing along.
So as you can hear, the firefighters of Catania were on their way to a job, and our 2 very cute companions, 2 of Benanti's vineyard dogs, were cheering them on, as dogs do. Sophie continued to explain the climatic impact on vintage year to year and how that's actually an important aspect of Etna wines.
Yeah. If a wine is always the same, that wine has to have a soul.
Right.
And sometimes, as an example, in 2018, 2019, it was not easy to reach the right amount of sugar. Alcohol, so probably we will have quite lean, fresh, but then probably with the time elegant wine. So that's that vintage, and generally speaking, that is Etna. So Etna is not a place for like big wines or very alcoholic, powerful wines.
Sophie went on to point out some of the oldest ungrafted vines in this particular vineyard, the Contrada MonteSerra. What's also really interesting is the training system. It's called an Arbarello, and it dates back to Roman times. It's basically a single stake driven into the ground. And if you're familiar with the Mosel region in Germany, it's a similar system. It's very effective when you have pretty steep slopes.
Wow, I think. Like, look at these.
That is a thick
vine.
That is a thick vine. How old is this vine?
But I think that a vine like this will be probably something like 80, 90 years old.
Wow.
I think. And the Arbarello is the traditional training system of Etna.
So it's staked, it's head trained?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The Arbarello allowed to plant vines even on steep side. Mm-hmm. And we still use the chestnut stake Chestnut is quite common as a wood here in Etna, and it's quite a resistant one. So it's quite good for the stakes, on which, of course, we tie and keep the trunk next to the stake. And this is what the workers started doing. Since I have to say that this year we have quite a lot of vegetation, they are starting now tying the canopy, part of the canopy and the upper part of the same stake, in order to allow then sunlight, heat, to hit the grapes.
From here, we walked back to their beautiful tasting room, where we had the privilege to sit down with Salvino Benanti. Salvino currently manages the business with his twin brother, Antonio. And he told us a little bit more about what makes Etna unique. Not only that it's a really small region, but also that its initial popularity among sommeliers and wine nerds, that appreciation is growing.
Yeah, so Etna really is a small appellation. It's 1,000 hectares, so it's about 2,500 acres, and it's 3.5 million bottles. So it's 5 times smaller than Barolo, for example, which is supposed to be a niche already. So this is a small appellation, but growers have proliferated. There are hundreds, from the very small to the much bigger, although the largest producer in Etna is still only going to be a 300,000 bottle producer. So we produce 160 and we rank near the top. So we're a small winery, but we're still one of the biggest. Oh, wow. But still, we're super small. Etna is only 5% of the whole Sicilian vineyard surface. And the wines we make here are mountain wines. In terms of the elegant, crisp, fresh whites and the light-bodied reds. So Etna needs to be introduced to drinkers almost door to door. Yeah. Otherwise, people would be sort of negatively, wrongly influenced by the stereotype of Sicilian wine, which is usually bigger wine, sometimes international varietals, or anyway big wines like Grillo, Nero d'Avola. Whereas on Etna, especially at a place like this, like our winery, we have very sort of vertical, lean, high acidity, crisp, dry food wines. Other producers have a different style. They may decide to harvest a few days later, attempt to get an extra 0.5% alcohol, maybe use newer oak. The appellation rules do not impose anything upon us in the cellar. They say how much grapes you can make in the vineyard, what the yield must be, there's some ranges you have to stay within, what grape you must grow. But then once the grape is in the cellar, you can basically apply your own style to it. So our Bianco is stainless steel only, no blend. Other wineries vinify in oak and they blend with smoother grapes like Catarratto, so you get a very different Etna Bianco. It's like you said, it's geeky wines. I mean, I said geeky. You said it's a small customer-based wines, but then it's highly passionate drinkers that will want to try different wine every week, share it with friends. So you're not going to see these wines at Total Wines or at large stores anyway. You're going to find these at small independent stores, a lot of restaurants. So if you're on the mailing list of a fancy Italian restaurant, at some point you will see an Etna wine dinner coming up. The East Coast is incredibly responsive to Etna, especially the greater New York area. So we're doing very, very well. Some markets prefer to focus on the entry level, which is not on the table right now, which is the $20 wine, because that's what most people drink. But our entry-level red was included this year in Wine Spectator's top 100 world wines list because of its price to quality. It's a $20 wine, but it's amazing at that price point. And our white was just a month ago on the New York Times as one of Italy's best $25 wines for the summer. So these things are, the New York Times is not a wine magazine, so it's read by millions of people. Eric Asimov, the wine critic, has been here twice, and he likes our style, he likes what we do. So when you get an article like that, it generates incredible. So Wilson Daniel is placing orders for all of our range, so they don't just want the easier wines. They're focusing on these contradas.
Of course, I had to ask a little about Giuseppe Benanti and family history, but also about how Salvino and his brother came into the wine business.
Yeah, my father started out of fun because he's a wine lover like you. He had a bigger job and he had a chance to invest. So he picked things up from where his grandfather had left them. Because we skipped a generation. My grandfather did not want to be involved with agriculture. So my father started again in the 80s when he was my age now. He has been developing the winery in his spare time because he kept his bigger job. And then 10 years ago, we sold the family business and we managed to find time and more resources to devote to the winery. So my brother and I have come back. We used to live in London. I used to work for Merrill Lynch Investment Bank. And my brother was with JP Morgan. You know. That was us. But I haven't worn a suit ever since the day I quit. So
and you're not looking back, are you?
No, not looking back. And my brother and I have applied some skills to my father's messy dream. And all we had to do is really build on the strong foundations in terms of quality and reputation that he had laid. And all we had to do was basically improve everything. So we've made investments in hospitality, in the cellar, in the vineyard, and trying to always reach new heights. And this was going to be really the most important year for us ever, because we come from a few very good years, and this year appeared super promising in terms of hospitality and exports. But then obviously, the pandemic hit all of us, and we had to sort of put a few things on hold. But we've bounced back terribly well. When the world more or less went back to normal and restaurants started to reopen, we received a lot of orders. So in terms of business, things are going very well. All we're missing really is the tasting room. Let's call it business.
So a little more on the tasting room and the fun that creates in a few minutes. But first, Salvino led us through a tasting of some of the newer wines that the vineyard is producing, particularly satisfying a demand that's in the middle range of the market.
The wine you're drinking is a new release from a place called Rinazzo, which is mentioned on the label. Where we have to mention the origin on the label because it helps the consumer a lot, assuming you know where the place is, but even if you don't, you can read the back label. And basically, this vineyard is at almost 800 meters, 2,400 feet, on the east side of the volcano, facing the sea. We have a lot of salty sea breeze blowing towards the mountain, and we have very high rainfall, much higher than anywhere else on Etna. Because the clouds.
I was mentioning that before.
Somehow stop. This is valley, and then they just basically unload all the water on the vineyard. But because it's highly draining, the water disappears, but the humidity stays. It doesn't do much damage because the wind and the breeze blows the humidity away. But in general, the environment is quite cool. And in the afternoon and early evening, we don't get much strong sunlight. We get sun at an angle that is good for the grapes to ripen, but it's not too hot. So basically, we never really get much alcohol percentage. This is 12%. This wine spends 1 year on the lease. It's vinified and aged only in stainless steel, and it's the first time we release. It's a new planting from 5 years ago. So it's basically the first vintage that we release only in 1,800 bottles because the initial harvests were very small. The vineyard will eventually be able to produce up to 40,000 bottles, but it will take a few years.
Sure.
We've started producing this wine because we wanted to take some pressure off the bigger Bianco Superiore, which is PietraMarina, whose first vintage is right there. And that spends 2 years on the lease. And we've now pushed its vinification aging time to 4.5 up to 5 years. So vinification, then aging, and then bottle. And we're going to release the next vintage of that wine in 2 years.
But sometimes it's sold out even before going to the market.
2 years from now. If you read about it, you'll see that it's considered one of Italy's best whites. So what we decided to do is, because it shows well after some aging in the bottle, we decided to hold on to it for an extra couple of years in the cellar before releasing it, so that when we release it, it's actually ready. And we have created this middle wine, also in terms of price, so that we can feed it to all those who want to drink a very saline, sharp, crisp, though complex Superiore, without having to take out a big loan to buy the bigger wine.
Our conversation was pretty wide-ranging, and at one point it did stray into the topic of natural wines. Now, Benanti doesn't produce natural wines. They do organic farming, but the topic of their special yeast did come into play, and it's a really interesting story.
We use our own yeast. It's a very boring paper you can download from our website. It's a chemical. It's a 5-year study that my father, being a chemist, has carried out, scraping the surface of many old vinification halls from the local farmers and isolating strains of yeasts.
Really?
Then he isolated 4. After isolating and then growing several decades, he has several dozens. He has eventually shortlisted 17 and chosen 4, which we have in a way patented. So they are yeasts coming from these grapes, so they're natural, but we have selected only the strains that show enough balance. So they're both vigorous, but they're not. They don't interfere with the properties of the grape. So since 2010, all of our vintages are fermented with these yeasts. Yeah. So what we do is we have a lab in northern Italy that grows them for us, and then at harvest time they send us what they look like milk bottles. Yeah. We basically our enologist knows exactly how much to put in each vat to trigger the fermentation, and so we never have any problems. So that's completely the opposite of natural.
Yeah.
I mean, we're using natural yeasts, but we're playing God by using only the ones that work. Because the yeast is crucial, plays a crucial role. So we're simulating a spontaneous fermentation, but we are injecting only the good yeast, the one that we know will do the job, will get the job done. So we never have an issue with the quality of fermentation. And that's so important because fermentation is the most important part of winemaking. If fermentation goes wrong, there is very little you can do to fix the wine after.
Of course, I was also interested to know where Benanti's chief markets are. And to no surprise, their focus is a lot on exports, and the United States plays a pretty significant role.
We rely a lot on exports. 70% of the wine is sold overseas, 10% in this tasting room to foreign wine travelers, and the remaining 20% is sold in Italy, like 15% in Sicily, 5% in the rest of Italy. So, but we rely a lot on exports, and the USA is 1/3 of our volumes.
Yeah.
I'm talking volumes, if it was a big word. We don't make much wine, but 1/3 of it goes to the US.
1/3 of your wine production.
And we go 4 or 5 times a year, and we cover 25 states through 18 small distributors. But we don't want to work with big distributors because then you're just one name in a thick book. Yeah. Whereas we work with smaller ones that we can WhatsApp and say, can I come to St. Louis, Missouri in 3 months, and they make room for you. I say, sure, you have 1 week with us. We'll be driving around the state, and we do wine dinners, in-store tastings, interviews with journalists, wine club, country club events, and then maybe a public tasting in a large store. And it's always a lot of fun because you're exposed to wine connoisseurs, but also to the general public.
Of course, having a beautiful tasting room and a gorgeous property with a very stylish swimming pool is helpful to attract guests and to generally engage the public. Salvino and Bianca also related some pretty humorous stories around the tasting room, and these are just a couple.
Once, it was a couple of years ago, we said, okay, we have a few English speakers, let's sit them together. It's just that some people were from Alabama, and the others were from Scotland. So you didn't really speak the same language.
It's nice.
So they were talking to each other, but there wasn't really any communication.
And twice,
fortunately, they didn't get to argue over whiskey or bourbon, but they couldn't really understand each other.
That's funny. But the cutest thing, and it happened twice actually. I try, taking reservations and speaking on the phone with people. I try to understand the type of people that are coming, just to try and put them together when we don't have space. And twice I put 2 young couples together, and one said, okay, it's my boyfriend's birthday, do you mind buying a little cake and then surprise him in the end? And I said, sure, no problem. So I went to buy this little cake. We came here, and the girl was smiling. It was her birthday too. It happened twice. And so we put another candle and they blurred together. We have pictures of those moments. But it's so funny. Yeah, and
that's really
one
funny.
told us, the other one did not. So we didn't know.
She thought her boyfriend did something.
Yeah.
3 points. Take it.
Exactly.
That's hilarious.
Yeah, it's fun. I think a tasting room is the perfect place to really get to know the producer, if he's around or if she's around, and so it's a lot of fun. And our season is very long. Usually from March to November, there is always somebody.
As you can tell, I really enjoyed our time at Benanti. Salvino, Bianca, and Sophie were fantastic. I highly recommend a visit if you ever make it over to Sicily. And obviously, the next time you're in a restaurant, whenever that may be, please look at the wine list and try to find their wines. They are truly special. That about does it for this episode. I've put a lot of links in the show notes. You can find them at eatdrinkfun.com/podcast episodes. Please also rate and review wherever you get your podcast. It helps a lot to get noticed. And please send suggestions for any future episodes if you think of them. I'm at Eat Drink Fun on Instagram and Twitter. Thank you again to the entire Benanti team. The intro music is Pluck It Up by Dan Hennig. This outro tune is Nimbus by Eveningland. Please stay safe, everybody. Wash your hands, mask up, get vaccinated, and let's get traveling again. Until next time, here's to eating well, drinking better, and always having fun.